Turn in your Bibles, please, to Acts chapter 11, verse 30. Acts 11, verse 30. It is said there that the disciples sent it, that is, the funds that were going to the church in Jerusalem, by the hand, singular, of Barnabas and Saul. One hand. Brother Neubauer, you may answer this when you get up. Were Saul and Barnabas Siamese twins that were joined together with only one hand? You argued that you cannot have a plural pronoun with a singular subject. Have you ever heard of a distributive singular in Koine Greek? Maybe you need to study the Greek syntax before you get up here and act that way. By the way, if he's not angry, brother, I'd hate to see him when he was. Think about his use of John 2, verse 20. He referred to this as a constative aorist that has durative force. But notice, it has the idea of past action involved here. That's the force of it. It's not durative action going on indefinitely into the future up until AD 70 or something like that. The basic force of the aorist indicative, according to James Turney Allen, and I can cite dozens of more scholars, and I don't just focus on one word and one grammar. The function of the aorist action stem is to refer to an action merely as an occurrence, its actual duration being ignored. Now watch. The past aorist indicative, that's what we're dealing with in the passages I cited in Romans 6. Why did he run out of Romans 6 and not deal with those verses and the aorist indicative there? But the past aorist indicative refers to an action as occurring in past time. But other forms built upon the aorist stem do not refer to past time. Here, the aorist indicative is what I stressed in Romans chapter 6. Herbert Ware Smythe says basically the same thing. On and on we could go, quoting grammar after grammar, Georg Corthius, Stanley Porter, Albert Kriegsperian, and so on. I have over 200 Greek grammars in my own library. Over 200. And I have read either all or virtually all of them. That is, all of their material. And he is way over his head when it comes to the aorist tense here, relative to that assertion that he made. And so his attempt here, relative to Ephesians 1:7, Romans 8:23, and so on, just falls apart. There is no prolepsis. In fact, there are over 1,400 errors. 1,400, over 1,400 from the book of Romans to the book of Revelation. And the vast majority of those, over 1,400 aorist verbs, the vast majority of those are indicatives stressing the idea of past action. Now, that is completed action in the past. That's the force. Now, getting to this illustration that he tried to make from Isaiah 7:14 and to come up with 3 fulfillments. You talk about stretching the truth. That is really stretching it. Let's look at Brother Neubauer's hermeneutic. How he tries to tie stuff together, come up with this. Hanged himself. Matthew 27:5. Jesus said unto him, Go and do thou likewise. Luke 10:37. Jesus said unto him, That thou doest, do quickly. John 13, verse 27. Jesus said, If you love me, keep my commandments. John 14:50. This is the kind of reasoning that's been done. Taking passages that have no relationship to one another and then making the assertions that they do. And that's all he's done, is make assertions and no evidence. This is an old preacher's joke. And it ends with a punchline, and so he did. And brethren, Brother Neubauer is hanging himself, spiritually speaking. And if you continue, or if you fellowship or accept his doctrine, you accept that, he will hang you with him. That's the implication. Now, let's go to Revelation 19. He talks about the marriage of the Lamb, and he talked about marriage practice. The marriage ceremony in ancient Israel involved several steps. You indeed had a spousal, but then you had the signing of a marriage contract. Technically, you were considered at that point legally married. When the marriage contract was signed between the father of the bride and the husband, you were considered married. Now they would immediately then go on and consummate the marriage, and then after that have a feast of celebration. The word marriage is used among the Hebrews of all of the different stages, sometimes of the espousal, sometimes of the signing of the contract, sometimes of the consummation, the sexual act, where the couple go off to themselves, and then sometimes of the feast. In Revelation 19, we're talking about the feast. In Revelation chapter 21, we're talking about the feast. But I want to show you something. I want you to notice from Revelation 19, which he says happened when? 87. To Revelation 21, he says that is 87. What is right smack dab in the middle between those two chapters? Revelation 20. He goes over that, and in that chapter you have a symbol of a great many years. 1,000 years. It's a symbol. It's not a literal 1,000-year period. Brother Nichols made that point and was accused of being a premillennialist, which was simply false. It was a lie against the good man. Brother Nichols understood that from Revelation chapter 19, if that's the destruction of Jerusalem, and if Revelation 21 is the destruction of Jerusalem, you had to have a significant amount of time between those two chapters. That was his argument in the Nichols-King debate. Not only do you have the 1,000 years, and by the way, it contrasts with the 10 days used earlier in the book of Revelation, which stresses a short time. The 1,000 years stresses perfection, completion, a great length of time. When the psalmist, when Jehovah through the psalmist says, the cattle on 1,000 hills is mine, is he talking about a literal 1,000 hills? Of course not. What about 1,001? They belong to him too. What he is saying is they're all mine. It's a great number. And the force of this imagery in Revelation chapter 20, 1 through 7, is a great amount of years. Then you have the little season, a short period of time. He's got to squeeze all of that between chapter 19 and chapter 21. Furthermore, in Revelation chapter 17, verses 8 through 10, the angel says to the Apostle John, "Here is the mind that hath wisdom. The 7 kings that thou seest, or the 7 hills, are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. 5 kings. One is. One, the other is not yet come. When he cometh, he must continue a short space. The 8th, even he is the beast, and goeth into perdition or destruction." Now I want you to notice something. Sometimes these fellows will say that the word kings here actually is kingdoms. And then they go back and try to finagle the numbers. The version that he likes to quote here, Young's literal translation, says kings, not kingdom. So that won't hold up, given your use of Young's. There were 5 Roman kings. 5 Roman kings. Augustus Caesar was the first emperor of Rome. Julius Caesar was not accepted, was not seen as the Roman emperor. Augustus, now he's going to quote a historian. Isn't that fascinating? He tells you people, throw away your histories. He's got them, brethren. He's got them. He says, Josephus said, Julius Caesar was never crowned king. Augustus Caesar was. First emperor of the Roman Empire. Tiberius, Caligula, who else? Claudius, Nero. That's 5. 5 are fallen. One is. Galba followed him. Was he the emperor? That would make Otho the beast. But Otho died a full year before the destruction of Jerusalem. That's not going to work. Otho was too busy running for his life because Vitellius came down and killed him. The real king, that is the 6th, is Vespasian. But he is not the beast. He can't be. He's number 6. See, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius were never recognized as emperors outside of Rome itself. Particularly Asia Minor, they did not accept them. Vespasian would be the 6th. The 7th is Titus, who reigned but 2 years. And that's exactly the idea here. He would continue but a short space. That makes the 8th who? Domitian, the youngest son of Vespasian. And by the way, he was the first universal persecutor of the church among the Roman emperors. Nero's persecution, according to Edward Gibbon, based upon the histories of the Romans, did not extend beyond the walls of Rome itself. So, try to untangle those histories and don't use a history book, because then you're violating your own rule. You made a rule. He said, but when it violates biblical history, this is another one of those always, however moments. It's amazing how he invents a universal affirmative and then comes up with an exception for it that conveniently fits his doctrine. And you know what a universal affirmative is. You were taught logic by 2 of the most trained men, best trained men, in the brotherhood in that field. Then, so the point is, Revelation simply does not fit his theory. And we get back to this. Think about it. I want you to consider his answers to some questions. True, false. This is the bottom one. Paul was obligated to continue to observe all the law of Moses in all respects until he died. He noted, not if it contradicted the law of Christ.
5 minutes.
That implies that if it contradicted the law of Christ, he was not obligated. But it states that. That's the fourth. But if it did not contradict, he was obligated. He had to keep it. So he was half married to the law. He was still bound to the law. He's half married to it. And yet he is also married to Jesus Christ. You know what they call that today? They call that an open marriage. Is that what you're saying? Is that the doctrine that you're now upholding? That Paul was involved in an open marriage in which he was tied to the law of Moses and he was tied to the law of Christ, but he gave deference to the law of Christ, or gave deference to Christ, but periodically jilted the law of Moses. That's still bigamy, regardless of how you slice it. Romans chapter 6, verse 14. We are not under the law, but under grace. Paul was not under the law, he said. He does not say, I was under the law only in those things where the law violated the law of Christ. That's how he would have to have that passage read. He says, we are not under the law. We are under grace. And keep in mind, he said that Romans 7 and consequently Romans 6 was written before Acts 21. So he has Paul in a bigamous relationship. Again, getting back to the illustration. The espousal, the marriage, involving the signing of the marriage contract, then the consummation, the feast. This fits precisely across the entire gospel dispensation. When you hear the gospel and so on, you become espoused. Paul's work, Paul's teaching, espouse them as a chaste virgin. They have been the marriage has been consummated. The contract is when you actually obey the gospel and accept the marriage contract, which is the New Testament, the gospel of Jesus Christ, Romans 1:16, which is the power of God unto salvation to everyone who keeps on believing. By the way,
2 minutes.
Romans 1:6. True, false. Romans 1:16, I said 1:6, 1:16, is applicable to accountable persons today, including Holger Neubauer. He said, true. True. He's been chiding me to go to the synagogue. Why doesn't he do it? Does he make a practice of going to the synagogue first and then to the Greek? Or is the goose, is it for the, not as true for the gander as it is for the goose in his case? It seems to be what he demands of others, he's not willing to do himself. That's the same thing on throwing away your history. Then we have this. I, Holger Neubauer, have history books in my library. I have a copy of the history written by Flavius Josephus. He admits both. When he made his statement, throw away your histories, he made it so emphatic. We can go back and show the tape. We can do again this idea of always and however. He's making laws and then not abiding by them. Then this. The Bible has to explicitly use the phrase, the end of time, for such to be true. He says false. So if the Bible implies the end of time, and it does, we believe that very fervently, and he knows that. If the Bible implies that the universe, the material universe, is going to be destroyed, then it must be the case that the end of time is a scriptural phrase. Thank you.